So, hello and welcome to this talk on the agricultural transition into a greener agricultural world, I suppose. I got ripped into this job as a moderator a bit late, so I might just not be as well equipped for this as the other person who was meant to be here, but I'm going to do my best. My name is Jacob. I'm part of Volt Denmark as a board member and Volt Europa, and Volt is a pan-European movement with 25,000 members in all of Europe. We have 100 elected members in Europe, and we are elected in 5 countries. As a young person, I am of course worried about climate change. I think that's very normal for most people, but especially for my young generation. And I'm fully aware that farming is a big part of the greenhouse gas emissions. I'm also from the countryside, so I know that farming is a hard job. I know that farmers don't have an easy life. So I think it's a very hard ask to just ask farmers to transition, so I'm very curious to see what people have to say. So if we start alphabetically with introducing ourselves, who we are, what we do, and why we're here. So if we start with Asger.
Thank you very much, and a little short presentation about myself. I am MEP and also farmer. We have 650 cows now, and I work with that every day. So I know a little bit about it. So and of course, yes, we have 30% of our CO2 emissions come from farming, and 30% from the transport, and 30% from the living cows. So it's about that. And of course, we shall take care of our part, and I'm quite optimistic. We will in 2050 we will be CO2 neutral in the agri sector. And that we are working very, very hard. In the last 3 years I've been in the Parliament. It will be one of my priorities in the Parliament to how we can go to be CO2 neutral in 2050. But I say I'm quite optimistic because there is so much new technology on the road now, so it will help us to be CO2 neutral. For the first, biogas. It's one of the things we have on the top. And after the Putin has going into Ukraine, so biogas being one of the top priorities, one of the top agenda in our climate, but also in our energy politics. Because if we use the potential of biogas in Europe, so we can push 40% of Putin's gas to zero again. So it's one of win-win on the climate, but also on the energy. So go forward through that way. So we can reduce our CO2 emission with 50% in the agri sector if we use the potential of biogas. And also there we have a new technology it's just coming now. Powerless technologies where it's been heating up to 650 degrees without oxygen, so we can put the carbon, yes, of course, carbon to the ground again, and they can stay stable there for over 1,000 years. So I'm really optimistic. Okay. And also methane is one of my report in the Parliament, methane strategy. Also there we have a lot of technologies in the pipeline. We have the feed additives on just now, but we shall have a little bit more research. So I'm so optimistic.
Good. And Francisco next.
Yes, nice to be here. I'm Francisco Reina. I'm a Green MEP from the European Parliament. So my colleague, I had the opportunity to make a trip with my colleague here to see is the exploration when we talk about animal transportation. I'm a member of agricultural sector, fishery sector, single markets, and also budgets. Well, I'm not as optimistic as my colleague here, but I think we can debate this further on. And I think it's very important also for us to talk about biodiversity, because it's commonly linked to agriculture development, and also water and forestries that are also very important, especially for countries that are from the south, and I'm from Portugal, and we see huge fires, we see water scarcity, we see, for example, Portugal uses 70% of its water in the agriculture sector, and so this is also correlated to animal farming, and so I think we should also correlate these issues when we talk about agriculture, so we can also have a common perspective on how should we reach this carbon neutrality. That I think is very, very difficult in the common sense and the common set of policies that we now have at European and at national level.
Okay, great. Then next up we have, yep, we can do Patricia first.
Great, thanks a lot. Hello everybody, my name is Patricia. I work for the European Environmental Bureau with the Federation of Environmental Citizens Organizations from across Europe, so you can say we represent the environmental movement or parts of the environmental movement at a European level trying to get better environmental policies. And working on sustainable agriculture is of course a key part of our work. The first thought I had when I was looking at the questions in the program was that yes, CO2 emissions from agriculture are an important issue. But of course there's many other environmental issues linked to agriculture, whether we talk about pesticides, water pollution, soil degradation, biodiversity loss. We've lost 60% of our animals since 1917 in Europe, and agriculture is not the only driver, but a key driver of biodiversity loss in Europe. For instance, it's a key driver of deforestation in our region and in other parts of the world. So there's many issues that we need to tackle to make farming and the whole food system, it's not just about farming, more sustainable. What is clear is that, I mean, the farmers are key in this process. The farmers are the ones that take care of the land, that produce the food, that take care of the animals. So we need to create a framework where farmers are supported in doing the right thing, and where we enable farmers to have a good life. A lot of farmers struggle to have good livelihoods. If you're a small farmer, a family farm, many farms struggle to survive, and every day farms in Europe close because it's not sustainable for them anymore. But the problem is that the wider system is broken. The food system is broken. So if you're a farmer, you're part of a broken system. It's very difficult to do the right thing. So there's many arguments that or many issues that we're working on in the system, but I'd just like to mention one in this kind of introduction, which is the question of meat consumption, which is something that has been debated a lot in the last years. In our farming practices, I mean, like in many other parts of our economy, it's always about more and more and bigger. Meat consumption has been going up in our region, it's going up in the rest of the world as well. But for instance, here in Europe, we're not even able to feed all the cattle that we have. We depend on importing the grains that our cows and pigs and poultry eat, whether from the Amazon, where the forests are burning, or we depend on Russia for the feedstock. So we're also very dependent, and it's not sustainable. So we need to come to a level of consumption that we can sustain ourselves. If we can't feed our own animals, there's something wrong in that system. And there's many other systemic problems in the food system. So I think we really need to look at the whole food system from, as it's now called at the EU level, from farm to fork. It's not only about the farmers, and it's not only about the consumers, because these two are the weakest parts in that whole scenario. We can do a lot as consumers, and the farmers can do a lot, but there's systemic changes that we need to see. For instance, discuss how we can reduce meat consumption and move to more plant-based diets as one piece of the puzzle. And just to end, also on a positive note, before I came here to Maria, I had the opportunity to visit the beautiful island of Samsø. Some friends of mine moved there some years ago, and they're into agroecological farming. And a friend of mine introduced me to a project there, saying that, look, if you're a young farmer and you want to invest in a farm, it's very, very difficult, because farms have become bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's very difficult to make that investment. It's very risky, and you're just not able to buy a farm anymore. So what they're doing there, they have set up an agricultural trust to buy farming land and then to lease it out to young farmers who want to run the farm as an organic farm. They also get some more support in building their business and building their business case to create an environment where young farmers can be part of the transition.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Torben Koffert, and I'm a vice chairman of the Danish Agriculture and Food Council, but I'm a farmer, and Some will call it a big farm, other will call it a small farm. I produce only plants. I work together with some very big farmers. We produce 55,000 pigs in a year, and we are having about 1,500 hectares. Actually, I can't understand what you are talking about. There's problems for the farmers because I don't see it, even not in nature. Yesterday, I went to a conference in Geneva, international conference, and the FAO said that we have to increase the food production in the world with about 20% before 2030. And at the same time, as the agricultural area in the world is going down, even when you still are taking rainforest in South America, the land where we produce food is getting less and less every year because of droughts. The desertification, taking land on about half of France every year in the dirt, and there we're producing food today. So one responsibility that FAO said for the rich country, it is that we are producing as much food as possible where we can produce food. We can come back to about this plant or animals, but so much food as possible. Because if we don't do that, the prices will be so high that the poor people in Africa especially, they can't afford to buy the food. And we can't make any policy that we keep the prices down because it is market driven, world market driven, and the rich people, they will buy the food to them what they want. One thing it is meat, yes, the other thing is beer. The first thing, when a poor guy wants to have get some money, the first thing, you don't go and buy beef, you go and buy a beer. So the use of cereals for producing beer in the world is increasing tremendously. We can't stop it. Maybe in a decade, maybe a generation or two, but at the moment now we need to produce it because it is the rich part of the world who take the food out of the poor people, and if we don't feed the poor people, they begin to move. And where can they move? Not to the United States, because they can't swim, and they can't buy a ticket. If they go to the East, they will be shot. They can move to Europe. Refugees problems. We haven't seen the problem yet. It's what FAO said yesterday. But back to how can we produce food? If we look at Europe or the world, it's only half the agricultural land, professional agricultural land, can be used to producing plants that people can eat. The rest is produced for this grassland and so on, and that's why we have the animals, because the animals are the best machine to convert this grassland to food, to food for the human being. It is with dairies, it is with meat and so on. And one of the biggest food producers, it's not a plant in the world, it's a goat, if you look worldwide. Because the goat can everywhere, they can eat the dry grass, they can eat bushes and everything. And that's why they produce the meat. But per kilo meat, it is the highest methane emission per kilo meat, it is from goats. So we can't just change the world because we want this as a popular policy in Europe. We need to do it cleverly. We need to find the technology how we can produce the main production of food, the industrial production of food, on a way where we are not hurting the climate, and at the same time that we keep the nature alive. Because if we don't keep the nature alive, if we miss the bees, a lot of our plants are reliable on the bees, and if we don't have the bees, they die. And I think that the human being will die if the bees are alive, because the pollinators are the most important animals we have. So the farmers are very aware to keep the nature alive, and we actually know what we can do. We have done a lot in the last 4 or 5 years in Denmark to make biotopes and make actually things in the nature on the farms that we are feeding nature back to a healthy state. That we can do. It's a lot better to taking a lot of agricultural land out and just let it lay and then maybe burn off in a nature fire one day and then we are back to zero. And so we have to have the nature as a crop on the farms. So we have a lot of technology. We will reach the climate neutral food production as same as we can feed the world as the way we are living with meat and everything. We can do it in 2050, maybe before. and I can come back to the technologies later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I believe that we broadly have like two different ideas. We have an idea that we can reach the goals of 2050 with the right technology, and then we have, I'm not sure if any of you sounded like you believed we could reach 2050, but you at least believe we need more than technology, we need to change our habits. So when Asger talks about technologies like burning biogas and sending carbon back into the earth, what do you think, why do you not think that is enough, Francisco?
No, I would not go into the energy sector of the agriculture. I would focus on what my colleague, can I say this, my colleague, stated that the FAO says that we need to increase food production because of several regions in the country that don't have access to protein. This has to be balanced, because what they really need to say is that some areas obviously don't have the access to this type of protein, and obviously they should have this access to this type of protein. But if you look at the European market, we waste at least 1/4 of our food is wasted. So it's not used for consumption of citizens or cattle or so on. So we have a huge gap there that we should be addressing. So 1/4 of our food, more or less, is wasted. So it's not a problem of having food. And more, we talked about also the FAO data, but we need to correlate it also with the World Health Organization that says that Europeans and the most of the Occidental countries eat bigger percentage of animal protein that they need, and that they need to be healthy. And so we are consuming more than we need. And so on that perspective, if we free some of these areas that are very intensive, if you look, for example, to have 1 liter of milk, you need 1,000 liters of water. If you need to produce beef, you need at least, by some calculations, 14,000 liters of water. This has also a huge impact. And 82% of the area of the European Union is to agriculture. And obviously this has a huge impact. If we increase the production and consumption of animals, we obviously use most of this area to direct or indirectly use the food to this type of sector. That's why I think it's also important for us to, as politicians, have the courage to say, okay, we are eating too much and we need to be an example. Because if everyone has this type of consumption in the world will collapse. And we can be talking about technologies to carbon sink, to have more production of animal by square meter, we won't make it. And in the end, we also have other aspects that are correlated with this type of consumption. We have health problems, we have water scarcity, we have soil depletion, and so we really need to have like a bigger debate on how should the consumption be. And to end, so I don't take the time of my colleagues, we also should be talking about finances. And when we're talking about common agriculture policy, this incentivizes the production of large-scale industry, and so that's why our political party, it was one of the main issues that we voted against, because it doesn't have the tools to help small, medium farmers to build up different types of system, in our perspective, obviously. And he also promotes the consumption of several products that, in our perspective, are not fit for this transition that we need to do in the European Union. We have several strategies that are important, the biodiversity strategy, the farm-to-food strategy, but in the end we have the fiscal incentives by the common agriculture policy and then by member states, and we can go even further to municipalities that finance certain types of production of food that is not clearly positive for this transition that we are talking about.
Okay, so the idea is then that we're gonna have to, of course, first of all, we have to not throw out as much food. You also seem to agree on that. You also seem to agree on that. You likely seem to agree on that. So if that is the issue, then how would we get to solve that issue? Would it not just be producing less food for our supermarkets? Or would we have to sell that food somewhere else? Like, do we need all the food in our supermarkets then?
Of course, I agree that we have to eat a lot less meat in the future, because we can't all eat 400 grams of beef every time we are in the restaurant and all these things. I have reduced to 300 grams. That's a joke. But we need to also, because the health problem in the West world is increasing a lot. That is because of the wrong protein, too much meat and too much fat. And so we need to decrease our intake of food. It could help a lot on the climate situation. But still, we can't come around that. If we reduce the animals production in Europe and move it out to somewhere else, because the market is still there. And if we move it to, we can't move it to Poland because they have 95, 96% production in Poland. They can't produce a lot more. So the next, if we close down the production here, we move it to South America. But the climate impact on the production for 1 kilo milk is 5 times higher in South America than it is here. The same with the pigs, it is 6 times higher than it is here, in South America than it is here. So that's why if we just stop it here, we're actually not helping the globe with the climate situation. We are helping if we eat less meat, then do it. And it is the consumers who have to take that decision that we are eating less meat, then you can help it. And then with this new technology about it works or not, we have heard that Mercedes and Audi, they don't have any metals in the car in 2050s. All will be built up in carbon and maybe some nuclear diamond batteries and all these things that you can drive in the car and test 10,000 years without any charging and all these things. But carbon, where should it come from? It comes from the plants, because we can't take it up as fossils. It can't come from the forest. The only places that can come is from the agriculture. And if we use only the plant, we can eat as people, human being. They are producing not enough. But if you use these photo plant, grass for example, we have a plant in Denmark where we first take out the good protein, grass protein. The grass produce double yield as a wheat plant, just to mention that. So we can produce more to change the crops. Then we take first the grass protein to animals because we can eat it as a human being too, but it tastes very bad, I can promise you. And then the fibers. We can use the sugar from the plant, we use it for the animals or for the industry. And the fibers, we can use it for industry, building industry, for the cows, for cars and everything. And it is the future, the technology is there. It's only a question, when does the industry decide to take that decision, the decision to go in that direction? And we have the product, if we want it. If we do that, then we also solve some of the industry's climate problem. So it is that wheel we have to turn around. We have to look, think in this case here in a new way, not in the old way that agriculture is a problem. Agriculture will in the future be the key to all the solutions because we have the basic product. And if we can convert it to nature, we don't have it.
So before the topic turned to carbon cars, I believe that Patricia had something she wanted to add.
Yeah, maybe a few comments. I mean, on some of the things that I've heard. I mean, I think it doesn't make sense, to kind of polarize and just say agriculture is the problem. I mean, I said it very clearly. The farmers are at the heart of the transition. We need agriculture. We all need to eat, and the rest of the world needs to eat. So that's not the question. So let's not try to reduce it to some kind of black and white picture. But fact is that the way the food system, and that includes farmers, but it's much bigger. It includes the food processors, it includes the packaging companies, it's much bigger. It includes us as consumers, the supermarkets, the distributors, etc. This system doesn't work. I mean, it works, but it works not in a sustainable way. And there are some systemic problems we need to solve, and in order to solve them, we cannot leave it to the consumers. I mean, some of us are more aware, others are less aware, but if we wait for people to take the right choices in the supermarkets, we're going to ruin the planet before. I mean, I consider myself a very aware consumer, but even I make mistakes in making my choices. Sometimes I'm under time pressure and I'll probably just grab a product from the shelf, and afterwards I turn it around and like, oh my god, I just realized, it contains this or that, or it comes from here, I wanted a local product, whatever. So we can't leave it to the consumers and we can't leave it to the farmers. There's bigger things, and some things need to be regulated. But I just wanted to comment again on this kind of, let's say, narrative of kind of feeding the world. The world has a hunger problem, and the hunger problem has become bigger through the pandemic, now through the war in Ukraine, and there might be other factors that make it even worse. But it's also a myth that we as Europe are feeding the world, because we aren't. There's a very recent report that the Worldwide Fund for Nature has brought out, which very clearly shows that there's actually an imbalance. We're importing more energy, food energy and nutrients than we're actually exporting. So we are eating away from the rest of the world, even though we're the wealthy ones and we're the big ones. So if we want to make sure that other parts of the world get enough to eat, we first have to stop importing massive amounts of feedstock for our pigs, whether we eat them ourselves or whether we ship them to China. Both of them is not sustainable. We need to eat less pigs, and the Chinese as well. We can't necessarily influence that, but we can't claim that we're feeding the world if we're actually eating away from the rest of the world. So I mean, in that sense, I mean, it's also a bit unfortunate that the current food crisis and the war in Ukraine has been used to basically argue that we need to step up production. I mean, first of all, we need to reduce the thing that we're wasting. 30%, 33% of all cropland in the world is used to produce cereals for animals to eat so we can eat them, or we can eat their dairy products. So I'm not talking about grazing land, I'm eating about animals that don't have enough to graze and we need to feed them with soy. So if we want to solve the hunger problem, let's work about this at a global level, not only at the European level, because we can't solve that alone. But let's not pretend that, that first of all, we as the EU are kind of feeding the hungry in the world. And let's not pretend that this needs to come with a reduction of meat production around the world. And we have to start. I mean, at the European level, we can only regulate what we do here, but we can regulate exports, we can regulate imports, we can regulate what ends up in the supermarkets through prices, through taxes, through the rules and regulations about, I don't know, how many animals you can farm if you can feed them. So there's a lot that can be done through regulation, and waiting for the consumers to do the right choices, I think, is not going to be the right path.
Wonderful. I think then the last question for both the IMPs is, if it's a regulation issue, then it's a European issue, right? It would be for the for the MMPs to make the right laws to make sure that we as consumers can change our habits. We more or less probably have to be forced to, because I usually work as a waiter, and I know that most older men, they want the red steak, they don't want the fish or the chicken. But because that's the easy solution, we know what that is, right? We want the burger when after a hard day of work. So how do we make sure that people will change their habits? How do we make that, those laws?
First of all, about 25% of the food we produce is going to waste. It's one of the problems we still try to address, and we have tried to address that in Farm to Fork, because if we reduce that to the half, what we have in Farm to Fork, so we can feed the 2 billion new people the economy in the next 30 years in the world. So it's one of the things we shall try to work very, very hard. It's me, it's you, it's supermarket, it's all the supply in the whole food production we shall take on board on this issue. It's the first thing, and the next for me is, I'm totally agree what Tor is saying. He knows a lot about farming, how the circular production on the land. So I'm still very optimistic. Very optimistic. Yeah, and I know we have changed a lot in the last 100 years in the agri sector to get the new method, new ways, so we are being more and more efficient. So, in my opinion, we must produce more and more for less. It's the way. And I know I've been in contact with a lot of universities in the last 3 years, because a lot of the universities are come to Parliament to say we have some news. And Tor was talking about grass. We have a new grass plants that can produce double what we have now. They are in the university. And if we can take new technologies on board, CRISPR, for example, we discussed that in the Parliament in a moment, and I hope we can get a decision in the next year. So we can all the plant can be more resistant of water resistant, and also you have a higher yield and all these things. So I'm still quite optimistic.
Great. Francisco.
No, I would say that we missed the huge opportunity when we talked in the beginning of the mandates of the Common Agricultural Policy that could be a game changer. How do we finance the agricultural sector to make this shift? Because the Farm to Fork strategy and biodiversity strategy was debated more or less at the same time, but the Common Agricultural Policy puts at risk these objectives of reducing the pollutants, the preservation of soil, decreasing of consumption of some types of animal products. And so in the end we have two good strategies, but they are strategies. And the money goes to producing the same type of system that brought us to this type of problem. And so I think in that sense we missed a huge opportunity. And then we have a bilateral problem that is, I think that we have in the European Union, but it's good because the states, the countries can do bilateral agreements, and so it's not all on EU regulations. So for example, in Portugal, we have our government, that is the socialist government, it made some agreements with China, and so we export 100,000 pigs each year to China, and we finance it with public money. And so we have several layers of financing that promotes a certain type of production system and doesn't promote the other. And so we talked about it, we agree, there's not a problem of food, and especially when we talk about the peak of population, you should reach the peak of population before 2100, and so several countries are decreasing now because they are having less and less children, and so in the end, the peak should be even lower, and we really need to first, as the European Union, consume less animal products, have better yields, restore our forests, restore our water cycles, having the money directed to those who have good practices. There are a lot, even in the animal sector, so let's all obviously keep that there's a difference. And when we talk about the farming, we also have bilateral agreements, and for example, one of the big issues is the European Union bilateral agreement with the countries of Mercosur, and that's on the stall because we don't have the traceability of products, we don't have the assurance of human rights on the Amazon, for example, of indigenous communities, and so obviously we have a role as a player at the international level, and we can influence them. And so if we don't do this at home, it's very difficult for us at the negotiation table, asking the same to the other partners. And we could also talk about fisheries, but we will not talk about it, but it also correlates with the food sector, and so we should not, we always talk about plants and animals on land, but we should also be addressing the issues that are very dangerous that are occurring in the fishery sector.
I think that's a great thing for another debate. Before I let anyone speak, I think it's time to let the people down here ask some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb. I believe there should be a microphone somewhere. I just saw one earlier. So if anyone has a question, please put up your hand, and hopefully it is directed to one of the people up here. No questions?
Just to say that there are no stupid questions.
Exactly.
That's a fact. Just go ahead and just ask what you want for each one of us.
Thank you very much. You said at some point that at the beginning of this mandate there was an opportunity with the new CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, but things changed halfway through, and I would like to ask why things changed since the climate crisis is getting worse and worse, and citizens also are, I think, more and more aware of this need to change our modes of production of food, our modes of consumption. So what's changed? And then the second question slash commentary, I find it very, very disencouraging when politicians tell me that we need to wait for citizens' consciousness to tackle the climate crisis. The climate crisis is affecting the lives of millions of people, and we cannot blame individuals for it. Politicians have the power through democracy to make decisions to protect people's lives, people's livelihoods and businesses in our economies, and we cannot be waiting for some individuals to collectively make the right decision, or waiting for the education process to make them consciously make that decision, because we have lives of people that are at threat. It's a bit like in the pandemic, that we could not wait for people to do the right thing, we had to impose the right thing on people. here is slightly different. I'm not suggesting imposition of restrictions, but how can we really have rules that prevent the most dangerous ways of development to be followed and thereby causing the worst impact of climate change?
I'll just quick answer the first,
Yeah.
because it was directed to me. I would say that the climate movement was mainly talking about fossil fuels, the energy sector, transportation, and it missed out a huge chunk of this problem that was the agriculture sector, the fishery sector. And so when we started to, because the package was introduced in the other mandate, and then the Parliament was debating it in this mandate, when we started talking about it, it continues the approach of talking about this in a climate perspective, but I think it was too late. And so the perspective of talking about climate with all the areas that we have inside agriculture and fisheries was not in place for us as a movement, at least some of MEPs that are in several groups, I'm not talking only about my group, but in several groups, to push this agenda inside the negotiations. And so in the end, we had some tools, the ecosystems, some smaller changes, but in the end we didn't change the bigger package. And that's why I think we had a failure, because in the beginning we didn't talk about it, and in the process we could not, at least the few that were talking about it, didn't have the voice to muscle up this in the final project, in the final CAP.
Okay. I think that since February, things has changed a lot in the world. So what they decided in the CAP, it will never be very important, because the market situation will move a lot more. This price level, all the cereal prices and most of the food prices has more than doubled to the farmers. They also know, because everybody talk about the climate, but the farmers feel the climate in the production every day. And so the farmers are thinking about what can we do on my farm to avoid the coming climate change. So it is a discussion in every farm, not only in Denmark, but in all of Europe, especially in the south of Europe. What can we do to that climate change? And it is now when they have money, because we have this very high price level. So they will convert their farms in a more climate-friendly production. Another thing, we have this a lot of wind power, solar power. It is increasing a lot in Europe at the moment. And at the moment now we don't have enough energy in Europe, but about a few years we have enough energy again in Europe in one and another way, when we have built enough wind turbines and solar plants. But in the high peaks we can't use all the energy. And all these high peaks energy, they produce nitrogen. They will do it, most of them. And that nitrogen will be the fertilizer to the agricultural production. And then you begin to produce, then you take about 60% of the climate impact on the wheat production away, or on the grass production. And if you take the grass production, it is 80% of the climate impact you take. Actually, you can make, with that kind of nitrogen, you can make grass as a climate neutral production. At the same time, you take the protein out, you take the sugar out, and you take this, the fibers out to the industry. So that converting of the agriculture and the industry will come very fast, because the energy is expensive and they need to find something else in the future, for the future. And it is now it will change. And I don't think that the legislators can even act as fast as the industry is acting. Because, just mention, remember one thing, when they in the European Parliament need to make a regulation, it will take, when we work very fast, 4 or 5 years. Mostly 10, 12 years before they make a new regulation. So I think it is a market and the movement, the ideas of people, and the young people especially, because there are a lot of young creative people who's coming up with some good ideas, how we can change the world. And these, the industry and the money, people who have money, they search for these good ideas that is coming up, and they invest money in them immediately. They're not profitable at the moment, but it will be. So the change will come before you see it. We don't know what it is. We know maybe some of these things, but it is definitely not the same agriculture we have about 5 years as we have today.
And Patricia, a chance to answer the question down here, first of all.
Yeah, I mean, I've already made my point on kind of not letting consumers save the planet. And I do believe that there's still a lot of scope for regulation, even though it takes place. But let's say we go to the supermarket and we want to buy, I don't know, vegetables free of pesticides. It's not my job to, find that one cucumber or that tomato, whatever, which is free of pesticides, but we can regulate pesticides. And we can regulate a lot of other things, because we shouldn't wait for the market to provide us with a product, because the market is failing us to provide us with these products. And I'm not, saying that, there's no innovation in farming, or, that a lot of things are changing. There are. But, again, I would neither leave it to the consumer, nor to, farmers, businesses, alone to find the solutions, because businesses will only adopt solutions at the point in time where it's very profitable for them, where they first find the investors, and then when it's profitable enough for the market to take it up. There's a lot of things around in the world which make a lot of sense, socially, environmentally, in many other ways, but they're not taken up because they're not profitable enough. Maybe they're zero profit, but we could still implement them, but the market isn't taking them up. So again, these are things where we need to come in with regulation and not wait neither for the consumer, not for the producer to provide us with that. And before you asked, are you optimistic, are you pessimistic? I wouldn't be doing my job if I was a pessimist, but I would just stay home and maybe do something else. I do think that we can change things. And I'm also inspired, when I talk to people who work hard to make a change. And there are a lot of innovations out there, but what I also see is that the current framework that we have still makes it very difficult for people who are innovative to actually be innovative and try different things when it comes to, doing, for instance, growing food outside, conventional agriculture, outside large-scale agriculture, going back to, family-sized farms, going back to agroecological practices. It's not easy. It works for some, but for others it doesn't. So we really need to change the framework. And the CAP is, for those who don't know, the Common Agricultural Policy, it's the biggest chunk of the European budget is going into subsidies for farming. So we are talking about a lot of money. And when the CAP was reviewed and reformed, despite a lot of voices from science, from civil society, also from farmers, because farmers are very diverse. It's not like every farmer is the same. Farmers have very diverse ideas of what the future should look like. So let's not put them in one box, and there's not one voice that represents all of their ideas. So, but at that stage, they're very, very powerful lobbies from the food industry, the food processors, the retailers, those who sell food at the end of the day, but also from big industrial farming, who benefit very much from the current system, which is giving a lot of money to the bigger the size of the land that you farm, the more money you get, no matter what you do. To be a bit bold, to reduce it a bit to black and white, but it is still, size is paying off, and not necessarily quality in the first place. So there were very strong voices that wanted that CAP to stay more or less as it is. So it has been improved, but its underlying system hasn't been questioned, even though everything's calling for it. So, unfortunately, we'll have to wait for another, some years before this can be opened again, which is very frustrating. It was indeed a missed opportunity also for the climate movement and the environmental movement to be more vocal about it.
So, lastly, I want Asger to answer the question before rounding up.
Maybe more comments, because I think it's been answered. And for many years ago, I was a child. Then we have a meat-free day in my home. It was Saturday. There was my mother take all the things from the 5 days in the week, and we get that on Saturday, and so there was a good Sunday for meat. So I think yes, of course we must try to go back a little bit back to what was happened 4 years ago. And second, we discussed a lot of the CAP. Factually, so it's the greenest CAP in the world. It's the greenest CAP in the world, and we have changed 25% of direct payment to biodiversity and climate and environment. So so there will happen some in the future between the countries. And the third thing, the world need animal protein. The world need animal protein. And I think, in my opinion, it's very, very important we produce it where we are most efficient in the world. And that is in Europe. It's facts. It's facts. So I think we must try to, of course, Thor has explained a lot of new technologies on this road in the future, and what I said in my start, I'm quite optimistic we are on the right.
So I think, last of all, I just want the last three of you to also have a rounding up comment, as Aska now got that, and then we'll round up. So, Francisco?
Well,
Short
I
comment.
would disagree with my colleague. Obviously, this is the greenest cap in the world because it's the only one and it's the biggest one. It's the biggest policy. No, it's the biggest by person. It's the biggest policy incentivizing of agricultural food sector is in Europe. If we talk about the EU budgets and the relations through each person, it's the biggest one in the world. And that's why we had huge expectations, at least in my group, so we could make a change in the CAP. But we couldn't, and well, we have to deal with that. I think in the end, we should have some expectations, but in contrary to my colleagues, I'm not that hopeful, because I see the mindset of the traditional politics being continuously being greener. So we talk about technology, we talk about increasing this and that, but in the end, our consumption model, the way we look at our paradigm, the consumption paradigm doesn't change. Especially doesn't change in the political parties that represent citizens. And so if we don't change the way we look at our economic and social system, and that has repercussions in agriculture, energy, transport, we really won't be able to solve our common crisis, that it's the climate crisis. And so obviously we should continue working and should reach to every institution, farmers, other politicians, other political groups, so we can find common agreements and so we can move forward. I think that's, at least in my perspective, in my experience, the best way we can go at trying to make these bridges and go along.
Last short comment from Thor. And short.
As I said before, the price level in food will be higher. And it is very high now, and it's double up for Christmas, right? We have double up the price for Christmas. You will have the most expensive Christmas dinner ever in your life next Christmas. So with these prices, there will be a lot of money to convert the industry. Not only the agriculture, but also the industry, the agri-industry who actually produce things for the agriculture and convert our product to food and everything. Another thing that I can promise you, for example, plastic. It is one of the biggest polluting problems in the world at the moment. Nobody talks about it because nobody wants it nobody knows how to get rid of it, because we are needing it everywhere in the food system, in the supermarkets and everything. Think about where plastic is, everywhere. Actually, in Denmark we have maybe a solution in a few months where we produce plastic or something else than plastic from plants, from waste plants. It's just to tell you, there are so many funny things in a way that it will change 10 times faster than the politician can think. So just when you see something new, some new product, it can be some new CRISPR piece or whatever it is produced, try it, buy it. That's the way you can move the investment and the development in the climate change and the agricultural production. Buy it. When you see some new boxes for eggs or for food you've never seen before, buy it. Because maybe it's a little bit more expensive, but buy it, because that's the way you're making the movement. And you will see a lot here in Denmark. You will, because we have actually from the agriculture, we have invested a lot of money in these small companies who had ideas, and so the technology is not new. They have had it for 10, 15 years, but nobody had dreamed about that it could be profitable. But now we are in this situation. The society look at it, and now it is coming, and now investors dare to invest in it. So it is coming. I'm very optimistic. We will be climate neutral a day, maybe in 2050, it's lasting, but I think it will be before, not in 2030, because all the things need to be built and changed and reproduced and everything before it is ready for the real market. But these technologies will be spread out to the world in the period from 2030 to 2040, and then it helps. All the other things, it is nothing compared to climate change.
And a last short comment from you.
But I'm not going to try and kind of summarize it, but just two final thoughts, because you're provoking me here with your buy it thesis. You know, I mean, this is something we don't need. I guess we all know it. We don't need this. We can survive without this. But it's standing here, and the market is telling me to buy it, and it has been sold to me as a good solution. It's lighter than glass, so you know, less CO2 when the lorry is transporting it, it's more hygienic than drinking from the tap. Whatever the market has told me to buy, it is telling the rest of the world. This is one of the biggest problems that ends up in the ocean. So this is what the market is giving me. So I'm a little bit less optimistic that the market is always providing the solution. The market provides good solutions, but it also provides this in big amounts. So this needs regulation. And the second thing is, because I can't remember whether it was you or somebody else, you mentioned, well, if you go to, you work in a restaurant, and then, you know, people, or you said, man, guys want to have that steak, you know? So I think this is a cultural question, you know? And cultures can change. There's 1 billion people on this world that don't eat beef. There's another 1 billion people on this planet that doesn't eat pork. They don't eat pork. We don't eat cats and dogs, but other people in the world do that. So we can change. This is all just our culture. We believe we need to order this steak, or, you know, this is what must feed us, etc. So we can all change. So that comes from us as individuals, as societies. We need this discussion, you know, in our schools, in our societies. I mean, now these discussions are starting, but I remember I'm from Germany, and a couple of years ago, when the Green Party suggested that famous Veggie Thursday, they were slashed, because how dare you tell me what to eat? I mean, nobody was saying you can't eat meat anymore. It was just a little proposal in schools, let's just not eat meat on one day a week. And the party lost all elections because they dared to tell people what to eat. Luckily, this is changing, because we need this discussion. You know, if we just leave it up to whatever we think, you know, is you know, what we need today, we're not going to make our objectives by 2050. So we need these really hard discussions as well in society. What do we need to live well, and what do we not need? So what doesn't work is just to impose things by regulation and, you know, believe people are just going to accept it. That's not going to happen. So we also need to have a, you know, more participatory approach and a more societal debate about what do we need to live well, and how much of that meat is it, and, you know, do we need the car in front of our garage, or can we maybe share with people living on our street, or whatever? Can we just drink tap water instead of bottled water, and all these things? So we need a broader, also an open debate about it. But I do believe that cultures can change, and that we can also change our habits without feeling that we're, you know, losing or, you know, giving up our culture or whatever it might be.
Thank you so much. I think we're a bit over time, but we also started quite late. So I just want to say thanks to everyone who came and listened to these 4 people. I want to say thanks to all of you. I want to say thanks for a very civilized debate. It was very teaching, very knowledgeable. It's a lot more civil than the usual Danish debates in agriculture. Danish TV, that's a lot more aggressive, so I'm very happy with this. And hopefully people learned something. Hopefully some people left a bit more optimistic. Yeah, thanks to everyone who came.